For over a century, one family has held a glittering empire in their hands, quietly controlling nearly every major diamond on Earth. They never needed fame, just power, and they got it, one gem at a time. This is the story of the family that turned diamonds into dominance and influence into legacy hidden in plain sight. But to understand how they got here, we need to go back where it all began. In the dry, sun-scorched lands of Kimberley, South Africa, a glittering revolution began with a boy finding a strange shiny stone. That stone turned out to be a diamond, and by the late 1800s, it had sparked a frenzy that would alter the fate of nations. This was no gold rush. This was something deeper, colder, and infinitely more valuable. What followed wasn't just the mining of gemstones. It was the birth of a global empire rooted in wealth, secrecy, and myth-making. Enter Cecil Rhodes, a young Englishman who arrived in South Africa at 17. At first, he wasn't chasing diamonds. He was sent to help with his brother's cotton farm. But Rhodes, with a keen sense for opportunity and an unrelenting ambition, saw a future not in cotton but in sparkling chaos of the diamond fields. He began acquiring small mining claims with the help of financial bankers, gradually piecing together what would soon become a monopoly. In 1888, Rhodes founded De Beers Consolidated Mines. The name, innocuous as it sounds, came from the De Beers brothers, who originally owned the land where diamonds were first discovered. But they had long since sold their stake, never realizing what it would become. Rhodes, on the other hand, knew exactly what he wanted, and he got it. By the early 1890s, De Beers controlled over 90% of the world's diamond production. But even empires need stewards. As Rhodes's health declined, a new player emerged, Ernest Oppenheimer, born in Germany and raised in the banking halls of London. Oppenheimer arrived in South Africa not as a miner, but as a diamond buyer for the powerful firm Dunkel Spoller and Company. He was quite calculating and brilliant. In 1917, he funded the Anglo-American Corporation with American backing. The company's name masked its ambitions. Oppenheimer had one eye on the future and the other on De Beers. By 1926, Ernest had skillfully worked his way into the boardrooms of De Beers. It wasn't a hostile takeover. It was subtler than that. He simply made himself indispensable. His leadership, his understanding of global markets, and his connections in Europe and America made him a force too valuable to ignore. Within a few years, he became chairman of De Beers, effectively placing the company and the global diamond trade under Oppenheimer rule. De Beers-Oppenheimer alliance wasn't just a business triumph, it was a transformation. Ernest didn't just inherit Rhodes's diamond empire, he reshaped it into something far more enduring. His son Harry Oppenheimer would later take this foundation and turn it into an empire not just of stone but of symbolism. From dusty South African plains to glittering London auction houses, the rise of De Beers was never just about digging rocks out of the ground. It was about controlling supply, curating demand, and crafting a narrative that would make diamonds more than just carbon under pressure. But building a fortune was just the beginning. The real power came when they learned how to control the story behind the stones. By the early 20th century, De Beers had achieved something no other mining company had ever done. They didn't just own the mines, they owned the market. But controlling diamonds wasn't enough. If everyone had one, how valuable could they really be? So De Beers did what any empire builder would do when they've already seized the land. They rewrote the laws of perception. The truth about diamonds is that they aren't actually rare. They exist in plentiful supply across Africa, Russia, Canada, and Australia. But De Beers understood something deeper. Perception creates value, so they began a decades-long strategy of hoarding diamonds. Not just thousands, but tens of millions of carats were kept out of the market, locked away in secret vaults in London, Johannesburg, and later Botswana. These stones weren't lost. They were waiting for De Beers to drip-feed them into the world like a precious medicine. And it wasn't just hoarding. De Beers operated through an exclusive distribution network known as the Syndicate, or more formally, the Central Selling Organization. Every month, select diamond buyers called site holders were invited to London. They couldn't negotiate, they couldn't pick and choose. De Beers showed them a box of diamonds and gave them a simple choice: take it or leave it. And they almost never said no, because to defy De Beers meant losing access forever. In 1981, The diamond giant was sitting on an estimated $5 billion worth of unsold diamonds. That wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy. Like a central bank controls currency, De Beers controlled sparkle. They didn't just regulate the pipeline, they invented the illusion that it barely existed. But scarcity alone wouldn't make diamonds sacred. That required myth. That required Madison Avenue. In 1938, in the middle of the Great Depression, De Beers hired N.W. Ayer, a New York advertising firm, with a nearly impossible task: make people crave something they don't need. The campaign they created changed human behavior across the planet. It introduced 4 magic words. A diamond is forever. That wasn't just a tagline, it was a commandment. It implied permanence, love, status, and security. The campaign flooded magazines and movie screens with images of elegant women being gifted sparkling stones. Suddenly, engagements without diamonds were seen as incomplete. Cheap diamonds were shameful. Bigger meant better. Love now came with a price tag, and it was non-negotiable. By the 1960s, thanks to relentless marketing and the illusion of rarity, over 80% of American engagements involved a diamond ring. It wasn't tradition, it was manipulation so smooth it looked like culture. The real trick was never the stone, it was the story. Even Hollywood played its part. From Marilyn Monroe's seductive crooning in Gentleman Prefers Blondes, diamonds are a girl's best friend, to James Bond villain Bluffold stroking his cat while dealing in illicit diamonds, the symbolism was woven into the cultural fabric. This wasn't just capitalism, it was alchemy. They took common carbon and with control, patience, and propaganda, transformed it into one of the world's most valuable illusions. Once they mastered supply and demand, they moved on to something even bigger: culture. In 1947, a copywriter named Frances Garrity scribbled a line late at night that would change the course of human relationships. A diamond is forever. She wasn't a marketing executive. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't even particularly famous. But in that one exhausted moment, she unknowingly crafted one of the most powerful advertising slogans in history. De Beers took that line and used it as the keystone of a global psychological campaign, one that would quietly engineer how billions of people viewed love. Before that moment, diamonds were not the centerpiece of marriage. In fact, in the early 20th century, many engagement rings didn't feature a diamond at all. They were often colored gemstones handed down through families or modest rings made of simple metals. In America during the Great Depression, diamond sales were plummeting. The public had more pressing concerns like food and survival. But De Beers saw an opportunity buried in crisis: redefine what love looks like and tie it to the one product only they could control. So they launched a cultural blitz. De Beers and its marketing arm wove an emotional narrative so strong it became indistinguishable from reality. They published stories of young men proposing with diamonds, actresses flaunting stones as proof of status, and brides-to-be staring longingly at solitaire rings. It wasn't just about selling a product, it was about scripting a ritual. The campaign didn't ask whether a diamond was necessary, it told you it was. In fact, it implied something more severe. If your love didn't come with a diamond, maybe it wasn't love at all. Soon, magazines featured articles coaching men on how much to spend. 2 months' salary became the unwritten rule, pushed by subtle advertising that suggested anything less was inadequate. And it worked. In 1939, only 10% of American engagement rings had diamonds. By the end of the 20th century, the number had skyrocketed to over 80%. This wasn't just in the United States. As post-war economies stabilized and the middle class expanded globally, De Beers moved fast. They launched regional campaigns tailored to Japan, Brazil, and China, each designed to plant the idea that a diamond engagement ring was part of a timeless tradition. But the tradition was barely 50 years old and entirely fabricated. It was a masterclass in emotional engineering. The diamond was no longer a stone. It was a promise, a sacrifice, and a status symbol. Women were taught to see it as a validation. Men were taught to see it as a duty. It became a ritual that carried weight far beyond its material cost, a modern dowry embedded in emotion and expectations. De Beers had convinced the world to define one of life's most personal milestones through their product, not by logic, not by need, but by belief. But while the world bought into the fairy tale, the family behind the curtain quietly built an even bigger empire. Once De Beers had convinced the world that a diamond meant love, They turned their attention to something even more aggressive: total control, not just over marketing, not just over prices, but over the very grounds diamonds came from. They didn't just want the story, they wanted the source. By the mid-20th century, De Beers was no longer just a South African enterprise. Under the leadership of Harry Oppenheimer, the company spread like wildfire across the globe. It moved into Botswana, Namibia, Angola, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Every new discovery was a fresh opportunity, but only if it could be bought under De Beers' influence, and more often than not, it was. Through complex joint ventures, exclusive buying rights, and secretive negotiations, De Beers didn't just enter these countries, they wrapped around them. In Botswana, for instance, the government partnered with De Beers to form Debswana, a joint mining venture that became the backbone of the nation's economy. By the late 1990s, diamonds accounted for more than 70% of Botswana's export earnings, and De Beers held the reins. In Namibia, it was the same story, only this time through a similar entity called Namdeb. These arrangements gave De Beers both access and leverage, because when your mine pays for a country's schools, hospitals, and roads, few politicians dare say no. But the empire didn't stop at Africa. When vast diamond deposits were discovered in the frozen north of Russia's Yakutia region, De Beers stepped in to form agreements with Soviet authorities in the 1950s, despite Cold War tensions. Even Canada, a country with a famously strict regulatory environment, eventually saw De Beers enter its territory, opening the Victor mine in Ontario in the early 2000s. In Australia, when the Argyle mine began producing a flood of smaller that threatened to disrupt De Beers' premium pricing model, the company responded by tightening its grip on quality standards and branding narratives, turning those diamonds into a lesser separate class altogether. What De Beers was building wasn't a company, it was a cartel. A sophisticated, globally integrated machine designed to control both supply and pricing. At its peak, De Beers controlled over 80% of the world's rough diamond supply. Prices weren't dictated by market forces. They were decided in private boardrooms in London and Johannesburg. Competitors weren't challenged. They were often bought out or buried under a mountain of legal and financial pressure. A smaller company in Sierra Leone or a rogue dealer in Antwerp could be frozen out of the market entirely if they refused to play by De Beers' rules. The US Justice Department eventually filed antitrust charges against De Beers, accusing it of price fixing and collusion. But the company was elusive. For years, De Beers executives avoided stepping foot on American soil to dodge subpoenas. It wasn't until 2004 that the company finally pled guilty to charges of collusion with General Electric. It paid a fine and was allowed back into the US market legally, for the first time in decades. Behind the polished luxury and romantic sparkle was a ruthlessly efficient system of control, built on backroom deals, quiet partnerships, and relentless pursuit of dominance. De Beers didn't just sell diamonds, they shaped the rules of the entire industries. The money was massive, the power was global, but it wasn't without consequences. The diamond business sparkled under the illusion of purity, but beneath the surface, behind velvet-lined cases and luxury brand names, there was blood in the soil. In the 1990s, the world began to see what De Beers and the rest of the industry had long avoided discussing: conflict diamonds, better known as blood diamonds. In countries like Sierra Leone, Angola, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, diamonds were not symbols of love, they were weapons. Rebel groups discovered that a single untraceable stone could be exchanged for rifles, rockets, and power. In Sierra Leone, the Revolutionary United Front used diamond profits to fund a civil war that killed tens of thousands and maimed civilians in ways that shocked the world. These were not distant tragedies. The stones that fueled those atrocities often found their way into the global supply chain, cut, polished, and sold as gifts of romance in New York, London, and Tokyo. De Beers never directly funded a war, but the company's stranglehold on the diamond trade meant they couldn't easily claim ignorance either. For years, they had built a model on buying up stones from a variety of sources, consolidating them in London and blending them into anonymous lots. The origin of a diamond didn't matter, until suddenly it did. In 2000, a documentary crew smuggled footage out of Sierra Leone showing children with amputated limbs, forced to work in brutal mines guarded by teenage soldiers with AK-47s. The footage aired globally, and for the first time, ordinary consumers began to ask where their diamonds came from. Hollywood followed with Blood Diamond in 2006. Starring Leonardo DiCaprio, which dramatized the chaos and corruption of the trade. The damage was already done. De Beers could no longer control the narrative. Under mounting pressure, the industry scrambled to respond. In 2003, the Kimberley Process Certification Scheme was introduced. It meant to track the origin of rough diamonds and certify they didn't fund armed conflict. De Beers publicly supported the effort and restructured parts of its buying systems to align with the new guidelines. They pulled out of certain high-risk regions, became more selective about their sources, and began emphasizing ethical sourcing in their marketing. But the cracks were visible now. Critics argued that the Kimberley process had too many loopholes. It didn't cover human rights abuses or environmental harm, and it relied heavily on self-reporting by governments, some of which were deeply corrupt. The system wasn't watertight, it was a bandage, and while it helped calm public outrage, it didn't erase the fact that diamonds, like oil and gold, had been used to fuel violence and suffering on an industrial scale. In 2012, the Oppenheimer dynasty, the family that had controlled De Beers for over 80 years, sold their final 40% stake to Anglo American for $5.1 billion. Just like that, a chapter closed, or so it seemed. For the first time since Ernest Oppenheimer took the helm in the 1920s, the family no longer held formal power in the company that had once defined their name. To the public, it looked like a clean exit, but few believed it was just about money. Nicky Oppenheimer, the soft-spoken billionaire heir, cited shifting priorities and a new focus on philanthropy. The sale was framed as evolution, an old-world family stepping aside for modern corporate forces. But for those who understood the game, it felt more like a magician's sleight of hands. By letting go of the spotlight, the Oppenheimers also let go of scrutiny. They shifted their influence into quieter spaces, private equity ventures, conservation funds, and intricate holding structures that traced across Luxembourg, Switzerland, and Mauritius. They had the wealth, they had the relationships, they had the map. And perhaps that was the point all along. Public empires come with headlines, private ones move in silence. So if they step back, who really controls the diamond world today? De Beers today is technically a subsidiary of Anglo American, a mining giant with stakes in everything from copper to platinum. But names on paper rarely tell the full story. The boardrooms still echo with the same accents, the same relationships, veterans of the Oppenheimer era quietly advising, investing, and steering from the edges. Nicky Oppenheimer now runs Stockdale Street, a private equity firm with vast holdings in African commodities, infrastructure, and aviation. The family may have left De Beers, but they didn't leave the game. Meanwhile, conglomerates like El Rosa in Russia sometimes operate in legal gray zones or under state influence. Deals are still made in private lounges, not public forums. The stage may have evolved, but behind the curtain, the players are as calculating as ever. The names may have changed, but the game remains the same. Could one family still quietly pull the strings of an entire global market? Leave your thoughts in the comments.